Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to the channel. And today I want to talk about something that's been, let's just say it's been weighing on me lately. The frustrating gap between understanding something and being able to articulate that idea clearly. I just got back from an incredible academic fellowship opportunity, and it's left me wrestling with some, let's just say, insecurities about my own knowledge and abilities, as I'm prone to have after being around a bunch of really intelligent people. It also follows immediately upon my giving a talk in Dayton, Tennessee at the centennial of the Scopes trial, where I was deeply involved in researching the past 100 years of history in an area really outside of my field, but giving a talk to experts in that field. You can hear that talk if you wish in my prior recording from a week ago. So what is it that I've been doing this past week? Well, I just got back from spending 5 days at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, as a participant in the Wheaton Scholars Program. It's a wonderful opportunity to get intensive theological training for people such as myself, research active faculty at secular universities. Each full day was spent with 10 to 12 other professors, all PhDs, all experts in their respective fields. We dove into Christian theology, discussing everything from theological anthropology to Christology to eschatology, from Augustine to Aquinas to the present. And the intellectual stimulation was incredible. Despite spending nearly 8 hours a day in discussion and learning, I never felt tired or unengaged. It was great, an awesome opportunity to engage with these topics with professors who could explain complex doctrines with such clarity, identify crucial differences in theological traditions, and help me walk through the logical flow of arguments in ways that really left me and the others, I think, in the room with a genuinely deeper understanding of really complex issues. Here I am sitting around being edified. We had a number of guest speakers. This is Dr. Kevin Van Heusen, who's a research professor of systematic theology at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He came over and talked for a couple hours about hermeneutics. It was a fantastic discussion, and there were many others like that. But here's what it got me thinking on the way home. I spent a good amount of time sort of recording my thoughts as I drove back to Ohio. And the thing that really hit me is, and one of the frustrations I had is I felt like I understood most everything that everyone was saying there. I'm familiar with the theological terminology, the history, the essential doctrines, whether it's Pelagianism or versus semi-Pelagianism, or views of free will and determinism, or the origin of evil. I knew what everyone was talking about. I could follow those arguments. But before I explore my frustrations just a little bit, not frustrations with anyone here in this room, or the co-sponsors, Dr. Josh Swamidas and Dr. Mark Cortez, but frustrations with myself. All right. Let me acknowledge something about how I've been thinking about all this. I find myself constantly reflecting on where I fall on the what's popularly known as the Dunning-Kruger curve. You know, that progression from blissful ignorance through the valley of despair and up toward the slope of enlightenment. Now, before I say more, I'm fully aware, just so you don't have to make comments below. I'm fully aware there's been a significant criticism of how the original Dunning-Kruger findings are commonly understood and interpreted. I've read the original paper. I know that the popular notion of how this psychological phenomena works isn't exactly entirely accurate to what they actually found. But for the purposes of this discussion and sort of framing my thinking and I guess my psychology, I'm just going to use the common interpretation, that familiar curve where a little knowledge can make you overconfident. Then real learning humbles you, brings you down into that valley of despair, before genuine expertise eventually leads you up the slope of enlightenment to true expertise. And here's the thing, I'm pretty sure that I too often get stuck in the valley of despair. Depends on what topic we're discussing. Now, of course, the whole idea of this program is that the individuals that are fellows are not experts in theology, right? They're experts in other fields. And so there's an expectation. You shouldn't come in feeling like an expert. You shouldn't be confident. You should feel like I have a lot to learn. hopefully in that valley of despair, and that they can bring you out of that up the slope of enlightenment to a greater understanding and a greater confidence in our knowledge of the subject. But it's like a lot of things. And I find myself thinking this a lot. I know enough. I know enough to know how much I don't know. Right? But I don't know enough to feel really confident in what I do know. It's that uncomfortable middle ground between ignorance and expertise where you're constantly sort of second guessing yourself. Do I really belong here? Am I really contributing to the conversation? Do I have something to contribute? Because that's also part of this Fellows Program, is that although you may not be an expert or really able to contribute in your current situation, through training, should be able to learn enough to be able to apply that knowledge to other areas of expertise, my own particular areas of expertise, and actually contribute something in an academic way, all right, to enhance our knowledge of our particular focus combined with our Christian faith. So what I'm hoping is that experiences like this fellowship, being around people who have clearly made it further up the slope of enlightenment, will help me find my way forward. Not necessarily to become an expert in everything, but at least to become more comfortable with the boundaries of knowledge and be more effective at working within those boundaries. Because here's what I've realized. You can get stuck in that valley if you're not careful. I often do. You can become so aware of your limitations that you forget that you still have something valuable to contribute. Need to find that place where you can contribute whatever your level of knowledge is. And that's what I want to discuss and talk about, really reflecting upon myself. But this is more a lesson for, hopefully for all of us, about finding your place in the conversation. Now, I've got a number of issues, as if you didn't know that from watching this channel, but picking up from where I was before, where I was saying that, as I listen to the conversation, engage in the conversation, I feel very connected. I feel like I've experienced most of the topics that we discussed, and I understand what's being said. But that's different. Understanding what you hear is different than sort of owning that as your own knowledge. And what happens is there comes a moment, all right, or I should say probably many moments during those 5 days of real truth, all right, when I'm asked, mostly rhetorically, about, our understanding or my understanding of the evidence for X doctrine. And suddenly I find myself mentally fumbling. As soon as someone else explains, right, that idea, I'm nodding along thinking, yeah, absolutely, that makes perfect sense. I get that. But I find myself really frustrated that I couldn't articulate those thoughts for myself, right? I needed somebody else to articulate them for me, in which case I then understood that I either agreed or disagreed. Okay, this happens to me constantly. It's not just with theology. I read a bunch of books and I think, wow, this was a really important point. I'm definitely not going to forget this. Right? 2 weeks later, I can't remember the name of the author, right? I can't remember the book title. I have to picture the book cover and maybe I'll remember some of the concepts, but the details very quickly start slipping away. Now I have a number of techniques to try to maintain that memory, mostly lots of highlighting, then often taking that highlighting and copying out those notes and actually putting a separate file. So for a lot of books, I have a file that's all the important stuff I think that I wanted to remember from that book. And then I can go look at it later. But it often doesn't become part of me, and I'm always just so, I'm in awe of others in conversation that seem to be able to just quote off, people, places, books, thoughts that are like quotes from books. I have trouble remembering basic things that I've memorized over and over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is, all right, so my background here is going to be a progression of pictures that come from watching a sunrise at the Grand Canyon. I woke my daughter up early. My wife and one of my sons didn't want to get up early, but my daughter was willing to. We got up at 3 a.m. We drove to the edge of the Grand Canyon and watched the entire sunrise series. Amazing event. I'm just going to show you a few images. It's kind of a metaphor for coming to understanding of things, and it gives you something else to look at besides me. So let me illustrate the problem here, and in something that I've been struggling with for a long time. And I'm sure many of you who know me well will recognize these symptoms. This is an embarrassing example, but it's very illustrative. By the fourth day of this time in fellowship at Wheaton, I'd spent a lot of time with the 10 individuals that were there. We were at lunch together, we were at dinners together, and of course we sat in this room for 8 hours a day. And there was one lunch on the fourth day where I remember looking around the table and thinking to myself, well, actually trying to name off everybody at the table, and I realized I couldn't remember 5 people's names. There were 5 people at the table for which we had spent innumerable hours together, and I looked them in the face and I said, I do not know that person's name. I'm not going to say who they were for those of you who are watching this video and wondering, is he talking about me? We had name cards in the classroom, which is great. That's fantastic. But I'm sure I became overly reliant on them. My brain was essentially saying, why remember this when I can just look at the card? Well, at least that's how I might try to rationalize it. But in reality, it's something much more insidious and problematic than that. This has been a lifelong struggle for me. Names, book titles, movie names, actors. I draw complete blanks, far more than most do. You really don't want to be my partner in a game that requires recalling dates, people, names of songs, and especially song lyrics. You got no chance of winning. But mention geographical locations, I'm awesome at that. More importantly, mention an idea, and I can often remember exactly where I read it or heard it discussed, but I probably won't be able to tell you the name of the book or the person I discussed it with. Names are the absolute worst. I feel like everyone says, oh, I'm terrible at remembering names too. And when they say that, I think to myself, you have got no idea how bad really that makes me feel. I have a colleague in my department that I've worked with for some 10 years. And for whom I would say 50% of the time, I have no idea what their name is when I pass them in the hall. I cannot conjure it up, walk past them, and it's usually several seconds later after I pass them that I remember their name. I have a former member of my department who I was on their search committee, and I even mentored them for the first year. And yet, almost never am I able to remember their name. And even right now, as I'm thinking about it, I have no clue. Like 2 minutes from now, I'll probably remember. It just doesn't come to me. I have tried so many different methods. I've done so much research on ways to remember names, techniques. None of them seem to work for me. It's a serious problem, and it really does cause me to avoid social gatherings in some instances, especially at work environment, because I have such a psychological fear now for drawing a blank on a name that I surely must know. And it just makes it far worse that I'm always thinking about that. I think about it constantly when I'm in a group environment with people I don't know. And I did spend in this past week, a lot of time going around the room saying names and trying to figure them out. And yet 4 days later, going around at lunch, half the names I didn't know. Okay, that's a problem. That's a little idiosyncratic to me, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. This brings me to not naming things, but something much more important. The ability to remember explanations and descriptions. Something I tell my own students all the time. And it's something that often haunts me because I always feel a little bit like a hypocrite when I say this to my students. I'll point out to them, I'll say, if you can't articulate something clearly, do you really know it? I've said this to students countless of times in my office hours. A regular part of how I help students is to not actually explain something to them, but have them to explain it to me. All right? Figure out where their misunderstandings are, then fill in the words and ideas that they need. All right? If you can't put it into words, I say, and explain it to somebody else, well, then maybe you don't truly understand it. And yet I find myself in situations where I feel like I know something, I cannot articulate it. And it makes me think, am I doing that? So here I am. So there I am, sitting in a room full of brilliant academics, and I am wrestling with this question about myself. Do I really understand these theological concepts if I can't find a way to express my thoughts about them? I feel like I have some excuse. I'm not a theologian by training, but what bothers me is the way that I lock up when I try to find the words to explain an idea. And this isn't just, we're not just talking about trying to explain a theological concept. It's also even scientific theories for which I'm pretty well versed in. I find myself stumbling over the words to be able to explain that. In my biology classes, I give students, organizing principles like understanding energy flow in living systems, or the balance organisms face between copying their genome perfectly and allowing mutations for adaptation. These are frameworks to help students kind of understand why biological systems work the way they do. But when it comes to theology, I feel like I really, as I analyze myself, I feel like I'm just learning facts for an exam, right? Rather than integrating the concepts into some coherent worldview that I can then articulate. And honestly, that really bothers me because I know there's a difference between surface level memorization and deep understanding. And it suggests I'm not making it my own. It's not who I am. It's not emanating from me. It's sort of like a duty to perform that I should know how to explain or describe something. What really impresses me about good teachers and scholars is their ability to identify the core issue on a complex topic and then walk you through the logical sequence that leaves you with genuine understanding. They can boil things down to basic principles and build up from there. And sometimes I struggle with this in areas outside my field. If I don't take detailed notes during brilliant explanations I hear, I'm going to lose flow of the logic. I think I'm going to remember it. I realize that is fantastic logic. I get it. I understand it. I think I'm going to be able to regurgitate that. But I realize that, no, I haven't truly understood it, because when I try to explain it myself, I find that I haven't really understood and made it like a core concept that I have a fundamental understanding of. So maybe turning my attention more to public communication and this channel and what I'm doing here. In science communication, the challenge is often even more complex. I find myself, I'm constantly kind of walking this line between how much depth of detail that I need to go into versus making it more accessible. I might understand like molecular mechanisms behind evolutionary change, but can I explain in a way that someone who has no science background can follow? That's a whole different skill than just knowing the science. When I'm critiquing young earth creationist arguments, I often find myself thinking, I know why this is wrong, but how do I explain it clearly without getting lost down into the technical details? Many of my videos are probably overly long, right? They're, for an hour and 15 minutes, I'm sure that I should be able to make that same point in probably 35 minutes. It's not enough to know just the science in these discussions with young earth creationists. I have to know how to dismantle bad arguments, scientific and theological. And I have to be able to do it effectively while also remaining respectful to the people who I share faith with, some of those young earth creationists. This is where that gap between understanding and articulation becomes particularly frustrating to me. I can see the flaws in young earth creationist arguments about geology and theology, but translating that understanding into a clear, accessible explanation that doesn't alienate my audience, that's a real big challenge. So here's something I'm learning to embrace. I'm trying to dig myself out of the valley of despair and come to a point where I can say, here's the things that I do know, and I'm confident in those, and that I have something to say that's useful and valuable to others. So I've been learning to embrace this. There's a crucial difference between competency and world-class expertise, right? And I feel like I was around world-class expertise on some issues this past week. And it's awesome and fantastic and great to learn from, but also somewhat daunting with respect to what can I say? How can I respond? But for what I do, at least what I'm doing right here, and for many of the things that I'm engaged with, decent competency is often sufficient. And I have to try to remember that. I don't need to be the world's leading expert on radiometric dating to explain why radiocarbon dating can't be used on rocks that are millions of years old. I need to be competent enough to explain the basic principles of that dating method and why certain young earth creationist arguments misunderstand them. When I'm making a video about the Grand Canyon and why it wasn't formed by Noah's flood, I don't need to have personally studied every single rock layer. I need to understand the geology well enough to explain what the evidence actually shows and why the flood geology model doesn't fit that evidence. I'd say part of good science communication is just being honest with what you do know and what you don't know. I'll often say, I'm not a specialist in this area, but here's what the specialists tell us. That's not a weakness. That's, I think, intellectual honesty. It's also modeling something important for my audience. You don't have to be an expert in everything to evaluate claims and think critically. This competency standard actually makes more sense for science communication than demanding world-class expertise on every single topic that I address. Now, if you're a world-class expert and you're at the top of your field and you're teaching others and bringing them up to your level, well, then you do need to be a world-class expert and need to be, you need to be very accurate and very clear and very detailed. I think this competency standard actually makes more sense for science communication than demanding world-class expertise on every topic that I address. My job isn't to advance the frontiers of knowledge in a particular area, at least not with what I'm doing right here, right now. I think it's to help my audience understand established science and think more clearly about claims that they encounter. Here's a little thing that keeps me honest in all this. I have people who trust me to give them accurate information about science and faith. And that is a responsibility that I really take seriously. And that's probably why I'm bothered at times when I feel like there are things that I don't explain well, which makes me think maybe I don't understand them well enough. When someone finds my channel because they're struggling with what their pastor said about evolution or because they're trying to understand how Christians can accept an old earth, they're looking for guidance. I might not be the best science communicator out there. Surely I'm not. But I'm the one they're listening to at that moment. So I need to be competent enough to serve them well. That's part of the reason that I joined this particular program, to help, increase my knowledge in areas outside of my field and help me integrate my thinking. This responsibility actually helps clarify my standards. I don't need to be perfect, but I do need to be reliable. I need to do enough background research that I'm not misleading people. I need to be honest about the limits of my knowledge, and I need to point people toward better sources when those exist. Every time I do make a video explaining why certain creationist arguments don't work, I'm not trying to destroy someone's faith. I'm trying to show them that God's creation is even more amazing than they might have previously thought. That requires competency, integrity, not necessarily world-class expertise, although that certainly would help. But I should always be striving to understand every issue as best as I possibly can. So this creates a bit of a paradox for me. I have the passion and desire to contribute more to these discussions, to be a real thinker, contributing to our knowledge, not simply repackaging it. I think I've got valuable ideas, and I think I can make connections between these concepts. In the last week, spending time at Wheaton, I absolutely appreciate the philosophical depth and theological nuances of the things we explored. But I also know I won't always express things perfectly or in the most efficient way. I'm going to stumble over my words. And in a room full of experts, that's intimidating. It's like the classic problem in Christian witnessing. People are afraid to share their faith because they might get some of the doctrinal points wrong and not have all the answers and not remember all the verses they wanted to say and stumble over their words. And yet the truth is, we're not called to have all the answers. We're just called to be witnesses, to contribute where we can. But knowing that intellectually, like me knowing that that's the case intellectually, doesn't make it really easier emotionally to participate and engage. So I am left wondering sometimes, where can I best be useful? How can I contribute meaningfully when I know I'm not going to be the most articulate person in the room? As someone who's a scientist and a Christian, I occupy a specific space in the science communication landscape, right? I'm not trying to be Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, or anything like that. I'm trying to be a person who can speak to Christians who have been taught to fear science. Now, when I'm responding to somebody like Ken Ham or Ken Hovind, I don't need to be more qualified than I already am, right? I'm not stressed out about that. I am more of an expert than they are in these things. Hey, I've already gone down the valley of despair long time ago, thinking that I don't know as much as I know. And I've gone way, way up the slope see, here it is. A perfect illustration of my problem. I know the Dunning-Kruger effect. I just talked about it earlier, and now I can't remember what the name. Oh, the slope of enlightenment. You see, there it is. There's an example. That term didn't come to me, even though I just used it 15 minutes ago. I guess I'm stressed out because I'm taping myself here, right? I just need to be competent enough to show my audience why their arguments don't hold up scientifically. And I just need to do it in a way that doesn't attack their faith, but attacks their bad ideas. Maybe my role is a bridge builder. Maybe I'm connecting people to other people who can say things more accurately than I can. Maybe it's asking the questions that help others clarify their thinking. Maybe it's bringing a different perspective from someone who understands the struggles between science and faith and trying to express those. And maybe that's what I'm doing right here. I'm trying to express some of my own fears. But more specifically, maybe my role is to be a scientist who can help Christians see that they don't have to choose between faith and accepting good science. Right? I think that's a pretty valuable niche, even if I'm not the most articulate person that could fill it. Now, this brings up a really important distinction that I think gets lost sometimes. When I'm making a video about the age of the earth, my audience isn't other geologists. It's Christians who have been told the earth is 6,000 years old. I don't need to address every single nuance that would matter to specialists, as much as some of you want me to, be more detailed and provide every little nuance. I need to address the specific misconceptions my audience has. And this goes all the way back to my day job as a professor. When I teach introductory biology, I'm not presenting the latest ideas in a niche field, right? I'm presenting established science in a way that builds understanding. So my YouTube channel is similar. Different audiences require different approaches and different standards of what consists of enough knowledge to make that a valuable service. When I'm responding to young earth creationist arguments, I don't need to reinvent the wheel or provide groundbreaking new research. I just need to be competent enough to explain why the scientific consensus exists and why certain arguments against it don't hold up. That's a different kind of expertise. It's one that's focused on communication, education, rather than sort of cutting edge research. But that does bring up something of a research dilemma. This connects to a broader question that I'm facing with this channel and my work in general. When have I done enough research to have something valuable to say? Or when is enough enough? As I think about videos that I make, I'm always doing research behind them, and part of the thing that is one of my stumbling blocks is it seems like I just can't stop finding out more. There's always some one little more thing I want to add. And I'm always trying to remember, I got to keep it general, keep it interesting. But I also feel like I have to know enough that I'm not saying something incorrectly and so it's very frustrating to find that level of, I'm not an expert in this field, but I still feel like I have something I can say about it, or that what I could say could be helpful to someone. This hits particularly close home when I'm responding to specific young earth creationist claims. When someone like Ken Ham makes an argument about radiometric dating, like the question I have in my mind is, how deep do I go into that research? Do I need to read every paper that's been published on that topic? Or is my competency in the fundamentals of radiometric dating, specifically radiocarbon dating, is it sufficient to help my audience understand why the scientific consensus exists? Am I going to be asked a whole bunch of follow-up questions that maybe I can't answer? And can I deal with that? So I guess maybe I've come to a realization that there's a crucial distinction here. I'm not trying to write for other PhD scientists, right? They've got their journals and their conferences. I'm trying to bridge the gap between complex science and believers who've been told that science contradicts with faith. So my standard isn't, am I the world's leading expert on this topic, but rather, can I help someone understand better what they did before watching the video? That's a really different bar, and frankly, it's maybe a more appropriate one for what I'm trying to accomplish here. I'm not trying to be an end-all, be-all expert on scientific questions relating to faith. I'm trying to be a generalizer, someone who can help move the discussion forward based on my current understanding. So look, my memory issues, to go back to that, they're not going to get any better. In fact, at my age, they're probably just going to get worse. I know I'm not a naturally aggressive networker, and it's really challenging in academic circles when you really need to be constantly seeking out opportunities and making connections. And one of the things I'm trying to do is be better at making connections in order to be able to learn from other people. Going back to this Wheaton Fellows Program, I had a really fantastic experience during the past week of this fellowship. I learned things that it definitely expanded my thinking and will be helpful, right, for things that I do on this channel. And hopefully I can use what I learned, and even if I can't express it as eloquently as others might, or many others did in my presence. Now, going back to my comparison with, the gospel witness and the struggles many people have with their own inadequacies, right? I really don't know enough. I'm going to mess up. No, I think it's perfectly appropriate to, as long as you have the central story right and you have the conviction and the care for who you're communicating with, to engage in that particular conversation. Maybe the real issue isn't whether I can articulate everything perfectly. Maybe it's about recognizing that, everybody has different roles to play in terms of how we learn. And I need to find where my skills are best suited. Not everyone's going to make the best argument, but I think we're all called to grapple with important questions and contribute however we can. So, as Dr. Joel Duff, as my channel is called, my calling isn't to be the most brilliant scientist on YouTube, and clearly that's an unattainable goal. It's to be a scientist who can help Christians and others learn about this world, come to understand better science. It's to be someone who can look at a creationist claim about the fossil record and explain clearly and respectfully why the evidence points in a different direction. Every time I make a video about why the geological evidence doesn't support a global flood or why evolutionary biology doesn't threaten the doctrine of the image of God, I'm doing bridge building work. I'm trying to show my audience that scientific literacy and some sort of faith can coexist. So I need to work more at seeing conversations with other people, whether those are academics, such as in this fellowship, or in the YouTube comments. I need to see each one of those as opportunities to understand things better myself. It's a two-way street, not just chances to prove, here's what I know. And that's actually what I'm trying to do right now. I'm wrestling with my own insecurities out loud, trying to understand where I can be most useful. And the truth is, I don't need to be the most articulate science communicator to make a difference. That, I think I've finally convinced myself of. I need to be competent. I got to be honest. I have to be committed to serving my audience. I need to keep learning, right? I need to keep growing. I need to keep finding better ways to explain complex ideas. I don't think that I need to wait until I'm perfect to contribute something valuable. So, that's where I'm at. I'm still learning, though unfortunately forgetting as much as I learn these days, but hopefully still growing. And maybe, just maybe, sharing the struggle will resonate with some of you. Maybe feels that same tension between understanding and articulation, being able to articulate what you know. So what about you? Do you ever feel like you understand something you can't quite put into words? Yeah, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening to me work through this, get this off of my mind, and try to refocus in this next couple of weeks on what I should be doing and where I should be going. Until next time, we'll see you when we see you.